Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about trigonometry where we find the value of an unknown side in right angle trigonometry where we use SOHCAHTOA. So it's so important that before you try this video, you know how to label a triangle and you know what the trigonometric ratios or SOHCAHTOA are. You also need to know how to substitute into a formula and use equations. If you don't know how to do that, especially labeling a triangle and the trig ratios, please go watch the videos on them before you watch this. So just a quick recap. So we can find the values of an unknown side on a right angled triangle, and that's the aim or the learning intention of this video, is to be able to calculate the value of an unknown side in a right angled triangle by using trigonometry. We can find the value of an unknown side of a right angled triangle when we have at least one angle and one other side in a right angled triangle. And we do this by doing two things. The first thing we do is we label the triangle, and we follow the steps of labeling the triangle as you would have learned previously. And then after we've labeled the triangle, we can then figure out which trigonometric ratio to use. Do we use SO if we have opposite and hypotenuse? Do we use cos if we have adjacent and hypotenuse? Or do we use tan if we have opposite and adjacent? And remember, in the trig ratios, theta, or that little Pokemon symbol, is the unknown or known angle. Sometimes it's unknown, sometimes it's known. Now, in order to find an unknown side, the angle has to be known using right angle triangles. The only other way of doing it is using Pythagoras' theorem, and there you need to know at least two sides. So let's go through the steps. The first step is always to label the triangle. Label the hypotenuse, label the opposite, and then label the last side as adjacent. The next step is to identify which trigonometric ratio to use. Are we going to use SO? Are we going to use CHA? Or are we going to use TOA? Sine, cos, or tan? The next step after labeling and identifying is to substitute the values into their correct place. And then the last step is to use equations to solve for the unknown value. And if the question tells you to round off, then you need to round off where required. If the question doesn't tell you to round off, then you round off and you indicate in brackets next to it what you've rounded off to. For example, 2 decimal places, 3 significant figures, whatever it may be. So let's go through a few examples. And I've done all the working out here, but I want you to follow the steps as I discuss them. And don't worry about all the purple and the black, just look at the green for now. Let's read the question first. The question says, find the value of the unknown side correct to 2 decimal places where required. So if this was an exam question and you didn't read it correctly and you didn't round off as indicated, you may lose some marks. So it's so important to read the question, to understand the question, and then to attempt the question. So let's have a look at the question first, the green. I'm given 36 degrees, I'm given one side as x, and I'm given one side as 16. So the first step here is to label the triangle. When I label the triangle, I know that opposite the right angle is always the hypotenuse. Opposite the angle is always the opposite side. And they're the two sides that I need for this question. So I'm using O and H. Now, if I go through SOHCAHTOA, which one uses O and H? Well, sine does. So I've identified that I'm using sine. So now I'm going to write the sine trig ratio, where sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Remember the steps? Label the triangle, identify which trig ratio to use, then substitute the values in from the question. Sine theta. Theta is the known or unknown angle. In here it's known, 36 degrees, that pops in there. Equals opposite being x, over hypotenuse. You can't flip them around. It has to be opposite over hypotenuse. The order is so important here. So that's why you take your time when substituting in. Once I've substituted in, I get sine 36 equals x over 16. And the last step is to use equations to get the pronumeral, or the unknown, by itself. Well, here I have x divided by 16. So using equations, the opposite of divided by 16 is times 16 on both sides. When I multiply 16 on both sides, this cancels out here, and I'm left with x by itself. So x equals sine 36 times 16. X equals sine 36 times 16. You'll see I got the pronumeral by itself. Now when I type this into the calculator, I get a decimal that keeps going. So I need to round this off, and the question told me 2 decimal places. So I look at 1, 2, and I look at the third number, and that means that 0 stays as a 0. So my answer is 9.40 meters, correct to 2 decimal places. And you'll see I've indicated that there. Hopefully you're getting the hang of it. If you're not, we're going to do 3 more examples, and hopefully by the end of them, you'll understand what to do. Let's go through example B. Now with example B, I'm given an angle, I'm given 2 sides. One of them is unknown. So step number 1 is to label the triangle. When labeling the triangle, opposite the right angle is always the hypotenuse, and there's nothing there. So I can leave that. I know I'm not using the hypotenuse for this question. Opposite the angle is the opposite side. Okay, I got that. And the last side left is adjacent. Now, I'm using A and O, or O and A. Doesn't matter. Which one of the 3 trig ratios uses O and A? Well, that's tan right there. So I've identified, after labeling the triangle, that I'm going to use tan. So the tan ratio is tan theta equals opposite over adjacent. Tan theta equals OA. O comes first, so opposite over adjacent. It's very important that you have the order correct. Step number 3, substitute into the questions the values that you know. So I know the angle is 17, so I sub that into there. And opposite, which is the first one, is 13. That goes up the top. And adjacent is x, so x goes down the bottom. Here, I'm going to show you a little trick using equations. You can do it the long way, but I'm going to show you a little trick. When x, or the pronumeral, or the unknown, is down the bottom of a fraction, you can simply swap it with whatever's on the other side of the equals. I'll say that once more. When the pronumeral, or the unknown, is at the bottom of a fraction, you can simply swap it with whatever's on the other side of the equals. Now, it's the same as doing it the long way, where we're going to times x, and divided by, and divided by. So it really is the same thing. It's just a trick or a quicker way of doing it. So here, I'm going to swap the x with tan 17, and you'll see I've done that there. The x is on that side now, and tan 17 is underneath the fraction. So when I type this into the calculator, 13 over tan 17, I get my answer. But again, it's not a terminating decimal. It's not a decimal that stops. It keeps going. And the question asks me to round off to 2 decimal places. So I have 5, 2, and then a 1. Because that's a 1, that stays a 2. So I have 42.52 meters. I found the unknown, that x there, to be approximately 42.52 meters. And I say approximately because I've rounded off. It's not the exact. Let's go on to example C. With example C, again, step number 1 is to label the triangle. So opposite the right angle is my hypotenuse. Good. Opposite the angle is opposite, but I got nothing there. And the last side left is adjacent. And as you do this a few times, you'll get in the hang of how to label a triangle. So now that we've labeled the triangle, I'm using AH or HA. Now, if I look through my trig ratios, which one uses AH or HA? Well, cos uses AH. It's the only one that uses AH. So I'm going to use cos as my trig identity here, or my trig ratio, sorry. So my trig ratio here is going to be cos theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So I'm going to sub in what I know. Cos, and my angle is 14 degrees and 16 minutes. That's how we read that. And that's how we type that in the calculator. I'm going to show you how to do that on the Casio FX Pluses. So let's have a look. So we have cos and the angle, 14 degrees, 16 minutes, equals A, adjacent, which is 17, over x, which is the hypotenuse. Now remember the trick? When the pronumeral or the unknown is at the bottom of a fraction, we can simply swap them. So here I have x equals 17 over cos 14 degrees 16 minutes. Now how do you type that in the calculator? Well, normally you know that you're going to type cos and then you're going to type, the bracket will automatically come in the Casio FX calculators. So you're going to have this, you're going to have cos and then the bracket's going to open. Now in this question, we're going to type 14 and then we're going to press the degree button, which looks like this, which you can find next to the hype button and underneath the square root button. So that's 14 degrees. And then we're going to press 16 and we're going to press the degree button once more. And that'll identify that as a minute. And then we're going to close the bracket. Now, if I use a highlighter, this section here that I just done is that section there. So I'm going to write 17 over cos 14 degrees 16 minutes, which is that section there of how to type it in the calculator. If you don't know how to do that, please go and watch the video on how to round off degrees for trigonometry or any unknown angles. So then again, when I type that in the calculator, I get a decimal that doesn't terminate, that doesn't stop. And the question says to round off to 2 decimal places. So I have 5, 4, 0. That 0 means that 4 stays. So it's 17.54 meters. Let's do one more example just to make sure that we're on the right track. So again, I have a right angle triangle. It's not really situated correctly as you normally would see a right angle triangle, but we know it's a right angle triangle because it has that little box symbol in the corner identifying that that's a 90-degree angle. So let's label the triangle. First step is opposite the right angle is the hypotenuse. Cool, got that. Opposite the angle is opposite. Got that. So I've found my two sides that are given. So I have opposite and hypotenuse. Which trig ratio uses OH? Well, that's sine there. So I'm going to use the sine ratio. Sine theta equals O over H. Again, substitute into the trig ratio. And now I have 14.72 at the bottom of this fraction, divided by 14.72. The opposite of that is times 14.72 times 14.7.2. That cancels out because it's the opposite or inverse of division. And then I receive this. Now it looks a bit complicated, but it's not. In the calculator, I'm going to type sin, and the bracket comes, 36, then the degree button, 14, then the degree button again, close the bracket, times 14.72. Say that again. In the calculator, just like we did for example C, we're going to do sin, and the bracket automatically comes in the Casio FX Pluses, 36, degree button, 14, the degree button again, and then close bracket times 14.72. Now again, I get a decimal that doesn't terminate. It continues on. So I need to round off to 2 decimal places. So here, 7, 0, and then there's another 0, so that remains as 7, 0, 8.70 meters, 2 dp. That's the value of the unknown side there. Hopefully after all those examples, you're getting a better hang of this. I got a few questions here for you to try. Give them a shot. If you get them wrong, it's fine. We'll just do them again. Label the triangle, identify the trig ratio, substitute into the trig ratio, use equations, and round off as the question says, correct 2 decimal places. Pause the video, give them a shot, and come back and check if you got the right answers. Well, there's the recommended answers. Hopefully you got them right. If not, go back and watch the video again and pause it and try to understand each step. Till next time, guys, take care.